Hello, welcome to Fantastic Beats. 3 people, 3 tracks. We swap them, we talk about them. I'm Jack Tutor.
I'm Lizzie Maris.
And our guest this time is writer and musician based in Tempe, Arizona, and author of Begin the Begin, R.E.M's early years. It's Robert Dean Lurie. Hello, Robert.
Hello, Jack and Lizzie. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. This is going to be fun. So, Lizzie, you've got the first of this time's 3 tracks, so give us it.
All right, so I will start us off. So my track is from the Go team, and that's the Go ! Team, because the Go team are a different band. So this song is called Huddle Formation, and it's off their 2004 album Thunder Lightning Strike. Interesting about this particular track, it is track 12 on the album, and as you'll hear later on, it is a total high energy banger. So normally around track 12, you're thinking, okay, we're maybe getting into the stuff that kind of felt a little bit more experimental, or a little bit more you wanted to add this because it's a bit more chilled. But I think it says quite a lot about this band that even their track 12 on the album is very, very high energy. So yeah, I particularly love this track because it's indicative of the Go team. So this was their first album that they kind of burst onto the scene with. It does really, really well. The Go team they make a lot of kind of cheerleader rock. When I was a little bit younger and I used to listen to it, I used to think, wow, this is like Sesame Street music, but for like teenagers and adults. So It's got a lot of fun samples and really fun beats and chants and kind of high energy positivity in it. And yeah, this track is just really fun. It has lots of samples. It has lots of chants. It's got countdowns like 2, 3, 4 in it. And I just really enjoy it. I think with this track, like kind of any Go team track, you sort of have to hold it really lightly. So the chants and the lyrics, they're really flimsy. They're really throwaway. You kind of don't look for too much meaning in it, unlike Michael Stipe, who we will talk about later. You don't look for too much in a Go team track. And Huddle Formation is just great. It's a great track to run to, or go to the gym to, or just get shit done to. It's very motivational, incredibly motivational, to the point where you really do have to be in the mood for it, because this is like an explosion of happiness and energy, and that can be a lot if you don't want that. So the thing that I really like about this track is that on this whole album, because it was their debut and it kind of shot them to fame, it was produced in one of them, I think the main person kind of behind this project, it was produced in his parents' garage, which is in Wales, and then it had to sort of be reissued after it became really popular. It's because they had some sort of sample clearance issues, which I think says a lot about this album. You can feel that total raw energy of just people chucking things together. And this is why you should always check your sources, because you may become famous and that may become an issue. But it's just people chucking things together, recording things in garages. And I think the main person behind this project then got asked to play a festival and kind of had to throw a band together to make that happen live, because originally it wasn't kind of intended that way. It was kind of all kind of put together, I think just digitally. So I like that. And then out of this you get this really, really fun, diverse band that there's a lot of dance moves when you see them, and there's a lot of fun. And I think there's just a lot of noises in it. And when you listen to the whole album, you know, as opposed to just this track, there's a lot of instruments involved. Like physically, if you ever see them live or you watch their videos, there is so much percussion. It is like a big old toy set has been opened and just off they go. So that is Huddle Formation, the powerful, powerful Huddle Formation. Jack, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, and I mean this in a good way, but it almost sounds like a pop song where they forgot to turn some of the microphones on, and then we're just forced to kind of cobble it together from whatever recordings they managed to actually capture. So they're like, oh, fuck, we've got a room mic where we got the drums. We've got kind of a microphone that's picking up the singing, even though it's like down the corridor. We can do this. And it kind of feels like a sort of midway between the sort of chaos of like a house party where the drums are like louder than, you know, anything else and kind of dominating the mix, and almost like a demo tape as well, where everything feels very like crumpled and about to fall apart. And it sounds like for the main melody, they kind of double tracked like a synthesizer and a guitar like on top of each other. It's a weird one to work out. It's got this sort of like fizzy smoothness to it, which I quite like. Sounds a bit like a firework or something. And the vocals are really weird, because when we first listened to it, I think it was in my car, and I was like, maybe my stereo just isn't picking up the voice that much. But then I put it on headphones and I was like, do you know what, they are actually just like really crushed to the back, and it sounds like that they've been captured on like a dictaphone or an old tape recorder, and the kind of they're always low fidelity, but the nature of that low fidelity seems to change like every time with each section of the song. It's a weird decision that they've gone for like different shades of shitness, but I mean that in a good way. But like, it's like, you know, it's got a really lovely sort of interference to it. I was really into it. And it's a strange production technique, I think, for a song which has this like bombastic happiness that I think you were referring to, and feels quite triumphant. It gives it almost like offsets that triumph a bit, the fact that it is quite a ramshackle kind of production technique that they've gone for. And yeah, the lyrics, as you say, I kind of looked them up because I was intrigued what was being said, because I couldn't hear a word of it, and it didn't really matter.
Just don't worry. Don't worry yourself.
There's references to skateboarding. I think maybe it's vaguely about just being young and clinging on to that. I think they're in their early 20s when this came out. So it was good fun. It's not a kind of song that I can imagine myself returning to much. It's just like a blast of happy. You know, it's like setting off a party popper. It's like, it's fun at the time. The streamers come down and then I'm like, right, on to the rest of my life. But what do you reckon, Robert?
Well, I do like the demented cheerleading squad aspect to it. I wasn't familiar at all with Go Team, so I didn't know if that's a quality that's in all of their songs. From what Lizzie said, it sounds like it may be.
Yeah.
It is so weird that it gave it maybe an unintended dark edge for me, just because it was so demented, and maybe their intention is just to be purely happy. So I might have been reading more darkness into it than is actually there. I enjoyed hearing Jack talk about the production choices, because that was something I was thinking about a lot as I was listening to the song as well. I don't know what I think about the fact that the voices are so low in the mix. I found myself wanting them to be more up front, I guess just because that's what I'm used to. At the same time, by them being so deep in the mix, it does emphasize the music a bit more. It emphasizes the percussion. And especially it emphasizes what Jack was talking about with the guitar and keyboards. And I was trying to figure out what was going on there as well. I should know this because I'm a guitarist, but there's a term for when you're picking the strings extremely fast. Do you all know what
Yeah,
the
they think
term
it's
is
called
for
like
that?
tremolo picking, isn't it?
Tremolo picking. Okay. So that's happening so fast. Either it really is happening, or they've kind of made it sound like that.
Yes.
So there's this sustain effect. So it's almost like a violin running through the song, and I just thought that was really interesting. And if they were actually picking it, the person's arm has got to be completely wiped out by the end of the song.
They've got a lot of energy. They have got the energy.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed it. It's probably worth my while to check out more of the Go Team, and I appreciate you bringing this to my attention.
Oh, that's brilliant. I think it's definitely I have got to get this thing done album, this particular one. So I have got to drive to this place or clean this house or complete this project quite quickly. It's that kind of album. Like, let's do this. Let's go. Oh, I'm glad that seemed to go down quite well. And I agree about the darkness in it. And I think that's where that kind of Sesame Street, the idea comes from, because that can be quite dark in places. You know, that's about life and puppets. You know, that's not all positivity. I agree with that. It's kind of overly saccharine to the point where you're like, there's kids' voices, you know.
Yeah, there's like an edge of frenzy, isn't it, which if it just goes slightly too far, you're just like, what is driving that? Because it isn't just like all good, shiny, happy things.
Right.
That's so funny. I've chosen that sequence of words. That must be subliminal.
That's
but,
really nerdy.
I
Yeah.
didn't.
Stop trying to suck up to him, Jack.
Let's go on to our second track. Robert, what have you got?
So I have brought Life and How to Live It by R.E.M. from the Fables of the Reconstruction album, which is their third record. And this song has great music to it, great lyrics, and it also has a great backstory. So I'll try to cover all three really quickly here. In terms of music, it is a little bit more of an epic sort of song, which is unusual for R.E.M., particularly in this phase. You start out with this atmospheric, chorusy electric guitar playing really slowly, and it just goes on. It's a very short intro there, and then it comes in with this absolutely killer riff, and then the whole band comes crashing in. And that riff, for me, for years I've been thinking that riff must have had some kind of influence on the Sonic Youth song Teenage Riot.
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah, and I did a search to see if anyone else had ever made that connection, but I couldn't come up with anything. But Teenage Riot has a slow, more drawn out intro, and then it has a very similar riff, but it's more grunged up.
Yeah.
And then you can actually sing the chorus of Life and How to Live It to the verses of Teenage Riot. So I think they were influenced, maybe not consciously, but I think there was an influence. Yeah, there's a lot of dynamics in the song. The chorus has kind of a soaring quality. There's a great Mike Mills backing vocal going on, which distinguishes a lot of R.E.M. songs. And then it has kind of a break in the middle where it goes back to that riff. So really great dynamics in the song. It's a great song live. It's a great song on the album. The singing is fantastic, and a bit unhinged in places. So then you have the lyrics, which I feel like they seem to me to be a fairly good approximation of a schizophrenic state. And that, I believe, ties into the backstory. So the backstory is that there was this man named Brivs Mekis who lived alone in Athens, Georgia, and people just called him the Old Russian. He never talked to anyone. And then he died, and when people went into the house, they discovered that within his house, he had actually completely walled off the middle of the house, and there were two separate apartments within this house, and then a door between them. And he was the only one living there. And each apartment was furnished completely differently, different books on the shelves, and different sets of clothes, magazines. And it's like he would live in one for a while, and then when he get tired of that, he'd go through the door and live in the other one. And the other thing is in apartment B, whoever was going through his possessions found stacked to the ceiling a self-published book called Life, How to Live. And he had written this book and had made printed up all these copies, and they had never been released out into the world. No one knows what his intention was with this. And apparently the contents of the book itself are a bit questionable. There's philosophies of life and health, but amongst that there's conspiracy theories, there's anti-Semitism, there's racism, and it's funny there's actually copies of this book for sale. It'll set you back about $995 on eBay.
Oh,
and it's really funny to read the reviews because people will give it three stars, I guess, for the R.E.M. connection, but then the review itself says, "A horribly racist book with ramblings from a demented Southerner." 3 stars.
But I like R.E.M. Yeah.
Yeah, and then on eBay, this is a must read. But then he goes on to say,
"Oh God, guys, get it together."
Yeah.
I'm not responsible for any of the views in this book. So Michael Stipe would do this a lot, where he would find some completely bizarre story or some bit of folklore, and then he'd run it through his own mental cut-up machine and spit it out into these lyrics, and then R.E.M. would come up with this amazing music. And this is maybe my favorite example of all of those things coming together.
Fabulous.
Wow.
Lizzie, what do you make of all of this?
Well, I just really appreciate the insight on that track from somebody who has literally written the book on it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I also looked up a little bit about that story, and I mean the track itself, like, yeah, I really liked it. It definitely sounded like R.E.M., which is I suppose what it's meant to do. But you know how some you think, oh, slightly different. For me, this was like, yeah, all of those elements that I expected to be in this track were there. I hadn't heard this track before. I don't think it's one of, is it probably fair to say not loads of people would know this one?
It's one of those deep cuts that hardcore fans of the early years would get really excited if it was played live, but your casual people that are familiar with R.E.M's most well-known albums wouldn't know it at all.
No, I love them, but I definitely didn't know this. So yeah, I think really this track is indicative of Michael Stipe's genius, really, and his songwriting genius, and the way that, like you say, the way that he takes something, cuts it up, and then kind of constructs it back together as something. There is very few people, I think, that can do it better than him. As a storyteller, sort of as a lyricist, like, definitely, but I think sometimes when you do look at their lyrics sort of written down, you're like, okay, but actually as a storyteller and the way that he does it, like, that's where I understand him, I think. And yeah, there's one particular bit in the song which I was like, there he is. I think it's a particular line where he says it really fast. So, you know, like if you ever played Mario Kart, and you can sometimes drive over those like chevron strips that make you go really fast quite quickly for like a few seconds. Michael Stipe, I love it when he does that every now and then. Like you hear it in pretty much all the way through in The End of the World as We Know It. You know, but I feel like he does a little bit in this one, where there's a particular line where he says, the air quicken, tension building, inference, and suddenly, and then it goes into the next bit. But he just does it really fast. And I suppose I can't really place this in their timeline, but if this is early on, I feel like maybe that's a glimpse into a technique he's going to use later on, but I might have got the timelines wrong on that one.
No, that's the right way around.
Oh, is it? Yeah. So I really liked hearing that, because I was like, this is you playing around with what happens when you just really speed it up. So yeah, really, really great song, but actually my favourite thing was listening to you talk about it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I love this song. So my story with R.E.M. is that I'd always had a connection to Out of Time and Automatic for the People, because my dad used to pick us up, me and my brother, and take us over to his house. It was like an hour and a half drive, and the only 2 CDs he really had were Automatic for the People and Out of Time. So that was my connection to R.E.M. for about, I don't know, 10 years, from the age of like 5 to 15. My brother got quite a bit into them, so I started to hear some of the later stuff he got up, I think, and Reveal. And I just sort of kept in touch with what they were doing. There's one of those bands that the connection runs so deep that you always feel like you want to know what they're up to, just to orient your life, really, just to see where they are compared to where you are. I never checked out any of the stuff earlier than Out of Time up until last year, where I was like, I'm going to challenge this assumption I have that they had maybe 2 feet-finding records before they really, you know, came in with Out of Time and all this business, which is for some reason in my head the timeline that I had. So I did every album in the discography from start to finish last year, and Fables of the Reconstruction is one that I really enjoyed and felt like a strange record after the first 2 for me, where the pace ultimately of the record on average seems to drop. Things get quite murky. The production is definitely like it almost sounds quite overcast to my ears. Although this track feels like a little bit faster and a little bit brighter than a lot of the other tracks on that record. I do like the really dirgy ones, but this one feels like a little bit of salvation for me, and a little bit of almost like a slight callback to the two records that come prior to it in terms of its tempo and its feel. That's kind of how it felt to me. I mean, it just sounds like R.E.M. is like a really tight, talented, connected rock band, which, you know, in their later stuff that I was familiar with, you get the idea of them as arrangers and, you know, adding in strings and just building these tracks into very cinematic kind of works. But I think in these early days, you just get a band that you can hear the fact that they've rehearsed together so much that they understand each other's energy and they know where they fit into each other's crevices. And everyone's just playing an absolute stormer. Like Mike Mills's bass is absolutely mental. Like it sounds like Peter Buck on the guitar is just keeping his guitar very simple at some points, just so that Mike Mills can do a few extra somersaults. You know, particularly in the chorus, he does that. What essentially becomes the main melody, where he does that, and you know, that's the bit you start listening to.
Right.
Peter Buck has like, it almost sounds like he's sort of scuffing the strings and sort of only getting some of them when he's playing like the main riff, which I absolutely love about his style. And then Bill Berry sounds like, to me, it always sounds like Bill Berry's playing. The way he plays it makes it sound faster than it actually is and more frenetic, like he's playing it on a ramp or something. And then Michael's great. My favourite bit about Michael is when he goes for that last chorus and says, "Listen to the holler," but basically misses every single note, but it's absolutely fine.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I love it. I mean, this to me brings me back to, well, only a few months back, really, when I was just listening to R.E.M. all the time, and you by extension, Lizzie, were doing the same because we drive around the same car. This is a really fun record, and just a absolute banger of a song.
So Jack, how surprised were you when you went back to listen to the early albums and realized that there was this entire run of albums that are exalted by a lot of American fans from the 80s?
Astonished. I couldn't believe it. It was like unlocking an entirely, what felt to me like an alternate history, but obviously it's like the history. I think it's just like, it's amazing to hear, like I say, just them playing as a band, like within a more conventional format, but in a format that sort of makes me appreciate their proficiency on their individual instruments and just as a group much more. So, Robert, did you grow up aware of this stuff, or did you have to like go back and dig out the early records, or where did you kind of cut into R.E.M.?
Well, I'm 45, so I came into it with Document. I was getting like heavily into music in my early teens and playing music, and so Document was the first one I heard. But a good friend of mine, his brother was always bringing these albums back from college, and R.E.M. were just huge on the college radio circuit. And so immediately, like, I heard Document right after it came out in 1987, and then within a month of hearing Document, I had heard Murmur and Life's Rich Pageant and Fables. So I hit this stuff just a few years after it came out. So the IRS years was my introduction, but very quickly after I discovered them, they moved to Warner Brothers and began moving into the things that you started hearing from your dad.
Well, let's go to our final song. So it is mine. It's a song by Jlin called Carbon 7. Jlin being Jlin Patton, an artist from Indiana in the US. And this track is from her album Black Origami, released in 2017, which was, I think, genuinely my favourite record from the whole of that year. So she kind of came to be known due to her connection to a scene in Chicago called the footwork scene, which is like a genre and a type of street dance. Not something that I'm familiar with in itself. I'm just aware of the fact that I keep hearing this scene in reference to her material, and it kind of seems to be comprised of this very intricate, fast-paced. It's intricate, fast-paced dance music, basically. Made out of samples and drums, like loads of different intricate details, and Jlin's music is essentially like built of the same block, so it's this lattice of like sampled drums and voices and electronics, which are all arranged into these rhythms that kind of roll around and flicker. She does this thing where basically she has two time signatures that she's always playing against each other throughout, basically all of the tracks on this record. So it has this really nice momentum to it. But also as well, it's not a momentum built on repetition, because I don't think there's a single section of this track which repeats itself verbatim. There's something different happening in every single increment of stereo space. So sometimes you'll just hear a tiny change in pitch of one sample, or the echo just sort of shrinking on one particular sound or growing, but if you blink you'll miss it and you'll be elsewhere before you know it. She clearly thinks so intensely about where every single thing is placed, and she posts a lot on Facebook about essentially her theory to how she goes about what she does, how she thinks about rhythm and where she places her samples. There's a real sense that she's there's a real craft to what she's doing, like a real dedicated craft, and it just demands this sort of hyper-real version of like conscious attention, which isn't really possible without stimulants that I probably won't explore. But this track is probably my favourite on the record. It has these like really good bass drops on it, which are these super slow and indulgent kind of slides down in pitch. It's kind of danceable, but not in a traditional way. And in fact, I don't know if either of you saw the video, but that kind of hammers that home. It's someone dancing in a warehouse, and the way they're dancing makes it seem very ambiguous as to whether they're controlling their movements or whether it's coming from elsewhere. And a lot of those movements feel very contorted and almost like someone's being plucked up by their back or by their head and sort of dragged around a bit. It's super powerful stuff. I really like it. Lizzie, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I think this to me felt like a very delicate track. It made me, every time I listened to it, it made me remember those mechanisms that, this sort of over-elaborate, intricate mechanisms that move a ball from one place to another.
Yes, I know the ones.
They go down a slide, and then that sets off a flame, which burns through the string, which then drops down here and then goes over there. It always made me think of that. And I feel, because I was thinking of Go Team as well, and this sort of the samples that they have, it made me think they're both quite playful tracks in their own way. So you've got these kind of this gallery of sounds of blings and cracks and rattles and chimes and things. But for me, this sort of belongs in a gallery. This is a fine art piece of music that could go in a gallery, because it felt so heavily curated to me, which was lovely. It felt very organized and together.
Yeah.
And it's a very clean track. It's very, very clean and precise. Is the way that the drums sound in it. So there's quite a few sounds in there that are almost like very refreshing sounds, like opening a Coke can. Or something,
for sure.
like things like that. Yeah, that kind of soundscape, it did make me feel cooled and refreshed, and like, wow, what a kind of clean metallic track.
Yes.
It's not my kind of thing, 'cause I do like my music with a bit more humanness to it, which is probably unfair to say because it's very much made by a human. But I was struggling a little bit to find the soul in it. But if I was wanting something to kind of take me down in sort of energy, at night or something.
Yeah, totally.
It's really, really nice for that. So I really enjoyed listening to it. I don't know if it's something that I would explore more, but yeah, it was nice to kind of delve into it. Definitely.
Fair.
Definitely.
I should say that I had a track from this album actually on our silent disco at our wedding, which was pitched quite well in the night. I thought it went down like a storm at the time. People were ready for it. Yeah.
I was not on your
You were
channel.
not on my channel, no.
I did not hear that, no.
Continues to be true. Robert, what did you think of this one?
Well, I liked it, and first of all, I'm just curious, what genre would you all say this is? Is this ambient? Is it what you said, footwork? Is it something else entirely? How would you define it?
I mean, I am awful with genres because, well, I just am. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, the way that I found it is I read a lot of experimental music magazines, and I found out about it through there. So, I mean, I think of it as sort of like I don't know, like exploratory, like electronic rhythmic music, which isn't a category I've seen in many record stores. Yeah,
right.
But yeah, it's difficult to pinpoint, really.
So my points of reference, the first thing that, or one of the first things that came to mind is probably not a very hip reference, but are you two familiar with an album called Passengers? It's a mostly instrumental collaboration between Brian Eno and U2. Have you heard about that disc?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Blimey.
There's one half of that puts me off. I'm going to be honest
right?
straight away.
U2.
Yeah.
So this is the concept behind the record was pretty interesting. It's called Original Soundtracks Volume 1, and the idea is that it's soundtracks to movies, and there's synopses of the movies, but the catch is that the movies don't actually exist. And,
wow.
And there's some interesting stuff, particularly when you get deeper into the record, and probably pretty heavy on the Brian Eno side of that equation. That sounds a bit like this. There's also an album that came out in the mid-'90s from Australia called Fake. And the gimmick with Fake is that they didn't announce who was in the band, but it's actually Steve Kilbey from The Church, who I've written about, and a guy named Simon Polinsky, who does a lot of ambient stuff. And Fake had two discs to it. One was more vocally oriented. A woman named Sandy Chick sang the vocals. And then the second disc was called Fake Symphony, and it was like an ambient reworking of the first disc. And this could also drop onto Fake Symphony pretty easily.
Nice.
The third thing it reminds me of is when I was at University of Georgia on the college radio station, Saturday nights from about 10 p.m. till 2 in the morning, it was ambient, trip hop. They would also, the DJ, who I never caught his name, but I'll be forever grateful to, one time he just decides he's going to play the entire album of Slowdive's Pygmalion.
Oh, yes.
Off the vinyl. And
that's bold.
Yeah. And he would play stuff like this all the time. I would just put on a cassette and record his program, and I'm so upset at myself that I don't have any of those tapes anymore, because I've never heard any of that apart from Slowdive. I've never heard any of that music again. I don't know the names of anything.
Ask him. Have you asked him? Do you know?
I have
who
no
he
idea
is?
who he is. Maybe I could do some research and figure out who was doing that show back then. But so I don't have a name for this genre. I like it. It's interesting that you said you're trying to find the soul in it, and it's true. It's people often use the term cold or synthetic to talk about this type of music, and I suppose that's true, but it's okay. It's like it's kind of it takes you into a different mental space. That's kind of where you don't need soul. It's like an alternate to that.
Right.
Maybe calm rather than cold is a better kind of
calm.
word.
Yeah. Although with her stuff, Jlin, she's bringing in those really off-center beats, and I do like the way that, although it was ambient, it progressed through different stages, which you don't always see with ambient music. So I like it. I might check out some more of her stuff.
Yeah. I totally recommend it. I think the discussion on whether or not this falls into like cold or whether there is kind of a humanity to it is really interesting. For me, I think the textures maybe lean towards it being something which is quite precise in a way which feels very mechanical, but for me it's the movement that's constructed the rhythm which feels to me to be quite human. I'm always very surprised with, say, the music we listen to in clubs, which has that very mechanical just boom 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 at the base of it when I think about the fact that, you know, movement seldom looks like that, and it is this call and response, very haptic flow, really. And I feel like a music like this, to me, feels so much more adherent to the way that I understand movement and an organic form of movement. That's where I see this to be quite a human work, and certainly not texturally, but I think rhythmically, that's where I find it. I think that's why it stuck with me, this album. Robert, this has been fab. Thank you so much for joining us and talking about these tracks.
Yeah.
This has been wicked.
I really appreciate it. I wish we lived closer together, because I'd love to just hang out and talk about this stuff all the time.
Oh, dude.
Oh, no, don't. I would just ask you about R.E.M. all the time. Questions like, what's your favourite song and stuff like that. So you don't wish that, maybe.
I mean, if people want to check out your book, which they 100% should, where's the best place to head?
I guess right now, Amazon.com, and it is at Amazon UK. I heard from a British reader just yesterday saying that he hadn't gotten his yet, so I think it's supposed to be out right now. I think it might still be getting shipped out from there. Amazon US, of course, will ship it anywhere. There's tons of great bookstores in the US I could mention. So U.S. listeners, my two favorites are Avid Bookshop in Athens, Georgia, and also Changing Hands here in Tempe, Arizona. I believe Powell's Books in Oregon, Portland, Oregon has it. So those are three really good independent bookstores.
Nicely done. That's wicked. I should say as well, I bought it today for a friend's birthday, who I know has been on the same. He came up to me last year and went, I've been listening through R.E.M's discography from start to finish. And definitely pretended that I hadn't told him that I was doing the same thing. But nonetheless, he's been on the same journey, so I know that he's going to absolutely love this, and then I'm going to pinch it off him and read it. So Great. It works well for the both of us. Well, thank you once again, Robert. It's been a pleasure. And to everyone listening, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.